Jonah Carter had never known silence like this. The sterile walls hummed with the soft vibration of machines, the air heavy with the scent of chemicals and cold metal. His wrists and ankles were strapped to a sleek, obsidian table, cables threaded through his skin like he was part of the machinery itself. A transparent dome encased his head, thin wires pulsing with unnatural energy. He tried to focus, but his vision blurred. A sharp buzz drilled into his skull, and his body ached with a sickness he couldn't name. Jonah had no idea how long he had been here. Footsteps approached. They were back. Through the fog, he saw them, the Tkari. Tall, bone-white beings with elongated skulls and lidless black eyes. They moved with precise, mechanical grace, their expressions unreadable. One of them stepped forward. High Researcher Voran. Cold, analytical, the one who had first spoken to him when he woke up in this place. Voran's thin fingers hovered over a control panel. He examined Jonah as if assessing a malfunctioning device. Subject 34A, he said in his smooth, emotionless voice. We will begin another trial. Jonah gritted his teeth. Trial? You mean torture? Voran barely acknowledged his defiance. Resistance is irrelevant. Another Tkari adjusted the controls. The dome around Jonah's head flickered with blue energy, and a surge of raw pain tore through his mind. He screamed. It wasn't just physical, it was deeper, like something inside him was being rewritten. His thoughts splintered. His body burned, muscles tightening against the bonds. His skin felt too hot, his blood moving too fast. The machines beeped erratically. Jonah felt something shift. Then everything stopped. Silence. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then one of the Tkari frowned, a small, almost imperceptible motion. Unusual. Voran studied the readings. His neural pathways have altered. Jonah gasped, his breath ragged. His skin tingled, as if the air itself had changed. He could feel the machines in the room. Not just hear them, feel them. Pulsing, humming, alive in a way he had never noticed before. The cables feeding into his arms felt lighter, like he could pull against them. He tested it. The metal restraints groaned. Voran's head snapped up. Increase containment field. Jonah clenched his fists, and the cables snapped loose. The Tkari barely had time to react before Jonah moved. He wasn't thinking, his body acted on instinct. He tore the wires from his skin and lurched forward, his arms trembling with unexpected strength. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. The world felt different, clearer, sharper, more defined. A Tkari guard stepped toward him. Jonah reacted before he knew what he was doing. He lunged. His fingers wrapped around the alien's arm, and something surged through him. The guard convulsed. Jonah felt his nervous system like it was his own, felt his muscles lock, his breathing halt. He let go. The alien collapsed, twitching violently. Jonah staggered back. He could barely breathe. What the hell was that? Voran didn't look surprised. If anything, he looked fascinated. This is unexpected, the researcher murmured. You are adapting faster than projected. Jonah's pulse pounded in his ears. He had done something impossible. He had felt the alien's body, its nerves, its heartbeat, and stopped it. He didn't know how. But the Tkari had made a mistake. They thought they were studying him. But now he was learning them. The next phase. The alarms blared, a low, bone-rattling sound. The fallen Tkari guard lay twitching, his movements slowing. Jonah stumbled back, his body still tingling from whatever had just happened. Two more Tkari entered, their movements more urgent than before. Jonah felt them before he saw them, a strange, static-like hum in the air, their presence disrupting the strange new awareness pulsing in his mind. Voran turned to them, his voice calm. Restrain the subject. Begin secondary containment. Jonah's heartbeat slammed against his ribs. They weren't going to let him go. He turned toward the only way out, the reinforced exit at the far end of the room. His body felt lighter, stronger. The closest guard lunged. Jonah ducked, too fast. His muscles reacted before his brain had time to process. His foot slammed into the alien's knee joint, and the guard collapsed, its limb bending the wrong way. The second one struck with a weapon, a pulsing energy rod, but Jonah caught their wrist. And then it happened again. The strange connection, like he was sinking into their nervous system. He could feel their biology, the electric pulses running through their body. Jonah twisted his grip. The alien dropped the weapon, convulsing violently. He didn't understand how he was doing this. But right now, he didn't care. Escape, or something close to it. Jonah sprinted toward the door. His body moved too smoothly, like every muscle had been fine-tuned. Behind him, Voron simply observed. Fascinating, the researcher murmured. Jonah slammed his fist into the door panel. The metal bent inward. Shock jolted through him. He shouldn't be strong enough to do that. Footsteps. More guards approaching. He needed to move. Jonah focused on the control panel, and for a split second, he felt it. The circuits. The electrical pulses. The tiny coded signals telling the door to remain locked. He didn't think. He pushed. A jolt of energy surged through his fingertips. The control panel exploded in a burst of sparks. The door slid open. Jonah didn't wait. He ran. The Tkari's first mistake. As he sprinted down the stark white corridors, his mind reeled. What had they done to him? He had felt the machines. The aliens. Even the power surging through the station itself. They had been experimenting on human adaptability. And it had worked. Jonah had changed. And now, the Tkari had created something they didn't understand. Their biggest mistake wasn't taking him. It was letting him wake up. Because now, Jonah Carter wasn't just human anymore. And they had no idea what that meant. Jonah's feet pounded against the smooth floor as he ran through the sterile corridors of the Tkari research station. Overhead, warning sirens blared, their shrill tones echoing through the empty halls. They knew he was loose. He took a sharp turn, his breath steady despite the unnatural speed at which he moved. His muscles didn't ache the way they should. His chest didn't burn with exhaustion. He was faster, stronger, something had changed inside him. The realization sent a chill down his spine. What had they done to him? A deep vibration rattled through the walls. Jonah glanced up. The lighting dimmed slightly, flickering for half a second before stabilizing. He didn't need an announcement to understand what it meant. They were locking down the facility. He had minutes, maybe less, before every possible escape route was sealed. Up ahead, a split in the corridor. He skidded to a stop, glancing between two paths. Think, Jonah. The left led toward the observation chambers. He had seen the Tkari move captives that way before. Dead end. The right led deeper into the station. He wasn't sure where, but forward was better than trapped. He sprinted right. The Tkari respond. Containment Unit 4 compromised. High Researcher Voron watched the holographic projection of the facility layout, following the blinking red marker that represented Jonah Carter. The human child was moving too quickly, reacting too precisely. He had seen humans fight before. Even their strongest were predictable. This was different. Has the subject reached stage 2? Asked one of the subordinates, voice carefully measured. Voron tilted his head slightly. Yes. And it is accelerating beyond projections. A second researcher hesitated. Shall we neutralize him? Voron exhaled slowly, his black eyes narrowing. There was no certainty that they could. A strange new awareness. Jonah reached a maintenance bay and ducked behind a supply crate, heart hammering. He pressed his back against the cold metal, listening. Footsteps. No, not quite footsteps. A vibration in the floor, a shift in the air pressure. He didn't just hear them coming. He felt them. The sensation crawled up his spine, sending a sharp jolt through his brain. It was like an invisible ripple moving through the world, brushing against his nerves. He clenched his jaw. He shouldn't be able to do that. A shadow flickered in the doorway. Jonah stilled. The guards were here. The hunt begins. 3 Tkari entered, their movements smooth and precise. They carried pulse weapons, short range, designed for quick incapacitation. Jonah should have been afraid. Instead, something inside him went still. The world slowed. His breath evened. His pupils dilated. He saw the way their shoulders shifted before they moved, the tightening of their fingers on their weapons before they fired. He could predict them before they acted. The first guard raised his weapon. Jonah moved. He ducked before the shot fired, rolling low across the floor. The pulse blast exploded behind him, shattering the crate where he had been a second ago. Before the second guard could react, Jonah lunged. His hand clamped down on the alien's wrist, and suddenly, he felt everything. The guard's heartbeat. The microcurrents running through his nervous system. Jonah didn't think. He pushed. The guard convulsed violently, his body locking up. His weapon clattered to the ground. Jonah released him, and the Tkari collapsed, unmoving. The remaining 2 guards hesitated. They hadn't expected this. Jonah exhaled, his pulse steady. Neither had he. But now he understood. They had experimented on him to force evolution. And it had worked. The trap. The final 2 guards didn't rush him. They adapted. They flanked him, careful and deliberate. No sudden moves. Jonah studied them, trying to read their intent. Then, he felt something. The air shifted. A presence, just outside the room. More were coming. It wasn't a conscious thought. It was an awareness, something deeper than logic. Jonah clenched his fists. He wouldn't let them take him again. The first guard lunged, Jonah sidestepped, grabbing his forearm and twisting. A sickening crack followed. The second aimed his pulse weapon. Jonah spun, yanking the first guard into the line of fire. A flash of energy. The alien crumpled. Jonah wasted no time. He snatched the fallen weapon and fired before the last guard could react. The pulse blast struck clean. Silence. Jonah stood over the unconscious forms, breath steady. He had won. But it wasn't over. The revelation. Jonah turned toward the corridor. He wasn't alone. High Researcher Voran stood just beyond the doorway, hands clasped behind his back. Unarmed. He wasn't afraid. Jonah lifted the pulse weapon. Try anything, and I'll put a hole in your chest. Voran tilted his head. Interesting. Jonah's grip tightened. You're not scared. The alien's dark eyes studied him. Fear is illogical. I am here to observe. Jonah scowled. You mean experiment? Voran's expression didn't change. You are beyond experiment now. A cold realization settled in Jonah's chest. They weren't trying to stop him anymore. They were trying to understand him. His hands trembled. What did you do to me? Voran exhaled slowly. What you were always capable of. Jonah's stomach twisted. He wasn't supposed to be like this. Voran took a step closer. You feel it, don't you? The shift in perception. The way the universe bends around you. Jonah's pulse roared in his ears. He did feel it. Every breath, every movement, every heartbeat in the station. He could sense it all. Voran's voice was calm. Too calm. You are the first successful anomaly. The first of your kind. Jonah shook his head. I'm not your experiment. Voran's gaze sharpened. You misunderstand. Then, for the first time, there was something in the alien's tone that almost resembled fear. We did not create you, Jonah Carter. We simply revealed you. Jonah's blood ran cold. The truth settled in his bones, undeniable. They hadn't changed him. They had only woken something that had always been there. And now, they had no way of stopping him. Jonah's pulse thundered in his ears as he stared at High Researcher Voren. The alien stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. No guards. No weapons. Yet, he was still in control. Or so he thought. Jonah's grip tightened around the pulse weapon he had taken. Move, or I'll shoot. Voren didn't flinch. You could try. Jonah's finger hovered over the trigger. Something felt off. The air around them hummed, filled with an energy he didn't understand. He could feel the station itself, the pulses of its power core, the low vibrations of distant machinery. Then it clicked. The Tkari weren't trying to kill him. They were still observing. Voren took a slow step forward. You realize it now, don't you? Jonah exhaled sharply. You were never going to let me leave. The researcher nodded. You are beyond an experiment now, Jonah Carter. You are a variable. And variables must be controlled. Jonah clenched his jaw. Not if I have anything to say about it. The final play. Jonah needed to move. Fast. The room around him wasn't just a room anymore, it was a system, a network, a living circuit he could almost touch. His mind flickered between inputs, data streams, connections. He could feel the station's energy. And he could manipulate it. He turned sharply, extending his awareness into the control panel near the door. His mind brushed against the circuits, not thinking, but feeling. The panel glowed in response. Voren's eyes widened slightly. Fascinating. The lights flickered. Power surged. Jonah had done something, but he wasn't sure what. A low rumble shook the floor. Then a voice, synthetic and cold, echoed through the intercom. Warning, core destabilization detected. Evacuation recommended. Jonah blinked. He hadn't meant to do that. Voren's head tilted. You are interfacing with technology beyond your comprehension. Jonah's pulse spiked. I don't need to understand it. I just need to use it. The station trembled again. The alarms blared. Somewhere deep in the structure, doors hissed open. Jonah felt movement, not just his own, but everything around him. He wasn't just escaping. He was forcing them to run. The breakout. Jonah turned and sprinted toward the nearest corridor. Voren didn't stop him. He didn't need to. The station was shutting down around them, bulkheads locking, lights failing, gravity fluctuating. The Tkari weren't used to chaos. Jonah could feel their panic rippling through the walls. His mind sharpened. He took the first left, 3 guards around the corner. He didn't know how he knew, but he did. Jonah dropped low before they appeared. A pulse blast whizzed over his head. He rolled forward, grabbing the nearest Tkari's arm and twisting. The alien collapsed instantly, his body seizing. Jonah didn't stop moving. The second aimed at his chest. He stepped into the shot, grabbed the weapon mid-fire, and redirected it into the third guard. 1 left. Jonah lunged, pressing his palm to the Tkari's neck. A shock traveled through his fingers. The alien stiffened, eyes rolling back. Jonah pulled away as the body dropped. His breath came fast, his skin buzzing. What am I becoming? He didn't have time for answers. Face to face with the enemy. Jonah reached an open docking bay. A sleek Tkari shuttle sat at the center, hatch open. One chance. He ran for it. And Voren stepped into his path. The station trembled around them, sparks raining from overhead conduits. The alarms screamed. Jonah didn't hesitate. He raised the pulse weapon. Move. Voren exhaled. Do you understand what you are now? Jonah gritted his teeth. Someone who's leaving. The researcher remained still. We are no longer the ones studying you. The galaxy will. The moment you step onto another world, they will see you for what you are. Jonah's chest tightened. And what am I? Voran tilted his head. Proof. Jonah swallowed. Of what? The Tkari's black eyes gleamed. That humans were never meant to be contained. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then the station trembled violently, and a massive shockwave rippled through the walls. The core was going critical. Jonah's decision was made. He fired. The pulse shot struck Voran in the chest. The alien staggered but didn't fall. Jonah didn't wait. He sprinted into the shuttle, slamming his hand against the controls. The hatch sealed shut. Through the viewport, Voran stood motionless as the station collapsed around him. Jonah exhaled sharply. Then he hit launch. The escape. The shuttle rocketed away from the dying station. Flames and debris exploded outward, swallowing the Tkari facility in a blinding wave of energy. Jonah barely strapped himself in before the ship jolted into faster-than-light travel. The stars stretched into endless lines. The station, his prison, was gone. He slumped back in the chair, hands trembling. His skin still burned with whatever the Tkari had done to him. His mind buzzed with thoughts that weren't his own. But he was free. For the first time in what felt like forever, he was free. The console in front of him flickered. A navigation map blinked online, alien symbols scrolling past. Jonah stared. Where do I go now? A long, slow breath left his lungs. He didn't know. But one thing was certain. Humanity had just changed forever. And the universe had no idea what was coming. The stars stretched endlessly beyond the shuttle's viewport. Jonah sat in the cockpit, fingers drumming against the armrest, his thoughts tangled in uncertainty. He had escaped, but to what? The ship's systems hummed softly, running on autopilot. Tkari symbols flickered across the console, their meanings unfamiliar yet strangely intuitive. He shouldn't have understood them. But he did. His fingers hovered over the controls. Where do I go? Earth? Unlikely. He didn't even know where he was, and the Tkari weren't going to let him return home. They wouldn't leave a loose end. A proximity alarm beeped. Jonah's eyes snapped to the display. Something was following him. The pursuers. Jonah adjusted the sensors, his breath steady but sharp with tension. 3 ships. Tkari design. He exhaled through his nose. Of course they wouldn't let me leave. The comm system crackled. A voice, smooth, emotionless, calculated. Jonah Carter. Power down your vessel. Jonah stared at the panel. He wasn't surprised, but the confirmation still sent a pulse of adrenaline through his blood. He didn't reply. The comm buzzed again. Your survival is an anomaly. Return, and you will not be harmed. A bitter smirk crossed his face. Lies. He reached for the ship's controls. The Tkari had built these systems, but somehow, he could feel them, the frequencies, the pulses of energy that powered every function. They wanted to take him back. They would have to catch him first. The chase. Jonah slammed the throttle forward. The ship lurched, its engines roaring as it shot through space. The Tkari ships reacted instantly, shifting into pursuit. They were faster. Jonah gritted his teeth, scanning the controls. He had no weapons. No shield strong enough to withstand direct fire. Think. His mind stretched, feeling the shuttle's structure, the energy currents coursing through its core. It wasn't just metal and circuits. It was alive, in its own way. Could he manipulate it? The ships behind him fired. Bright streaks of energy ripped through the void. Jonah jerked the controls hard left, narrowly avoiding impact. His body moved too smoothly. His reactions were too fast. It wasn't luck. It was evolution. A map flickered across the screen, asteroid field, 30 seconds ahead. That was his shot. He pushed harder, the ship groaning under the strain. The Tkari adjusted course, closing in. Jonah stretched his mind, feeling the ship's power flow like a second pulse beneath his skin. He didn't just pilot it. He became part of it. He twisted the controls, and the ship responded before he finished the thought. It vanished into the asteroid field. Through the storm. Rocks the size of buildings tumbled through space. Jonah wove between them, fingers steady on the controls. The Tkari ships hesitated at the edge, calculating risks. Jonah exhaled sharply. Hesitation. That's all he needed. He closed his eyes. Feel the space around you. The asteroids weren't obstacles. They were part of the system. His mind synced with the ship's scanners, mapping every fragment in real time. He moved without thinking, dodging, twisting, each motion too precise for human reflexes. A Tkari ship followed. A mistake. Jonah pushed forward, dipping low under a massive rock. The ship behind him mirrored his movements until Jonah shifted unexpectedly. The Tkari vessel hesitated a second too long. A chunk of debris collided with its hull. The explosion sent shockwaves through the asteroid field. One down. Jonah didn't look back. A desperate offer. The second ship was closing in. The comm flickered on again. Jonah Carter. This is High Researcher Voren. Jonah's jaw tightened. Still watching, huh? Voren's voice remained calm. You have demonstrated impressive adaptability. We underestimated you. That will not happen again. Jonah snorted. So what, you're offering a truce? A pause. I am offering you purpose. Jonah's fingers hovered over the throttle. Excuse me? You are beyond humanity now. You have evolved beyond simple classification. Return to us, and you will not be a prisoner. You will be a pioneer. Jonah almost laughed. You want me to believe that after you strapped me to a table? Voren continued as if he hadn't spoken. Your survival has proven what we suspected. Humans are capable of more than any species before them. But you are the first of your kind. You cannot survive alone. Jonah's breath slowed. A trap. A game. But something in Voren's tone felt different. What if he was right? Jonah had felt it, the change inside him. The way he moved, thought, reacted. He wasn't normal anymore. Could he ever go back? His grip tightened. Not interested. Voren sighed. Then you leave us no choice. The ship fired. Outmaneuvered. Jonah threw the shuttle into a spiral. A bolt of energy grazed his hull, sending sparks flashing through the cabin. His mind stretched outward, feeling the ship's failing systems. The damage was minimal, but one more hit and he wouldn't be so lucky. He couldn't outrun them forever. Jonah inhaled. Then I won't. He cut the engines entirely. The sudden drop sent the shuttle into freefall, tumbling between the asteroids. The second Tkari ship overshot its mark, just slightly. Just enough. Jonah slammed the power back on and fired the thrusters, launching himself upward in a sharp arc. The Tkari ship, caught mid-maneuver, didn't have time to adjust. A wall of rock met its path. The explosion ripped through the asteroid field. Jonah's shuttle soared through the debris cloud, untouched. Alone in the void. Silence filled the cockpit. Jonah exhaled, hands trembling slightly. The Tkari were gone. For now. But Voren's words lingered. You are beyond humanity now. Jonah stared at his reflection in the viewport. His own eyes looked different, sharper, brighter. His body felt weightless, his mind wired into something bigger than just himself. He had survived. Again. But he wasn't naive. The Tkari weren't done with him. Neither was the rest of the galaxy. Jonah looked at the ship's navigation panel. He had a choice to make. He wasn't just running anymore. He was deciding what he would become. And whatever that was, the universe wasn't ready for it. Jonah Carter sat in the cockpit of the stolen Tkari shuttle, staring at the navigation panel. The screen flickered, showing a set of unfamiliar star charts. He had no idea where he was, no idea how far from Earth. His hands rested on the controls, fingers motionless. Where do I go now? He had escaped. He had survived. But what was next? The thought gnawed at him like a parasite. The hum of the ship pulsed through his skin, sinking with something deep in his nerves. He felt the vessel in a way he couldn't explain. Like it was an extension of him, an extra limb he had only just discovered. The realization sent a chill through him. The Tkari had done this to him. But they had also been afraid of what they created. They're not done with me. Jonah exhaled and turned his attention to the console. His fingers hesitated over the controls. Earth? A human colony? Somewhere unknown? He had to decide, go back, or disappear forever. Then the sensors flared red. Proximity alert. Jonah's breath caught. No. Not now. He tapped the console. A new blip appeared on the screen. Something was closing in, fast. The final pursuit. The comm system crackled. A familiar voice came through. Jonah Carter. You cannot run forever. Jonah's jaw clenched. Voran. The Tkari weren't done. They had followed him. A second blip appeared. Then a third. 3 ships. This time, heavier class vessels, built for pursuit and capture. They weren't here to negotiate. Jonah gritted his teeth. You don't know when to quit, do you? Voran's voice remained calm. Neither do you. Jonah glanced at the NAV screen. He had seconds before they caught up. He couldn't outrun them in a straight fight. He needed an exit. His mind stretched, not just thinking, but feeling. The ship's systems pulsed beneath his skin, waiting for input. The NAV map flickered. A new route appeared, one the ship hadn't displayed before. A wormhole. Unstable. Dangerous. Jonah swallowed. Better than being a prisoner again. He punched the controls. The ship lurched, engines roaring as he aimed for the tear in space. The decision. The Tkari ships closed in. Jonah felt their weapons locking on. Do not enter the anomaly, Voran warned. It is unstable. It will kill you. Jonah smirked. Sounds better than going back with you. A brief silence. Then, you still do not understand, do you? Jonah's fingers froze over the throttle. Something in Voran's tone was different. You think this is about controlling you, Voran continued. It is not. You have already proven we cannot contain you. But do you know what will happen if you return to humanity? Jonah's breath slowed. They will fear you. They will study you. They will do exactly what we did, only without understanding. Jonah's chest tightened. He had been so focused on escaping that he hadn't thought about what came next. If he returned to Earth, would humanity see him as one of their own? Or a threat? Voran's voice softened, almost regretful. You are no longer human, Jonah Carter. Not entirely. The question is, what will you do with that? Jonah's pulse pounded. He had spent every moment trying to get away from the Tkari. Trying to survive. But now? Survival wasn't enough. He had to choose what came next. The wormhole loomed ahead. To disappear. To leave everything behind. Or... He glanced at the NAV screen. The system had finally loaded human space coordinates. A colony. Not Earth, but close. A place where humanity thrived, outside the core systems. A place where he could test the waters. Jonah's fingers tightened on the controls. I need to know. He adjusted course, away from the wormhole, toward the colony. He wasn't going to run. He was going to see for himself. The Tkari ships followed, But Jonah was done playing defense. He stretched his mind into the ship's systems. The engines roared hotter than they should have. The controls vibrated under his fingers. The stolen shuttle jumped forward with impossible speed. The T'Kari ships hesitated, momentarily thrown off. Jonah was gone. First contact, again. Jonah's ship dropped out of hyperspace, slowing as it approached the colony world. A vast, blue-green planet filled the viewport, human civilization stretching across its surface. His throat tightened. This was it. The comm system buzzed. A voice crackled through, sharp and commanding. Unidentified vessel, this is Terran colony defense. State your name and purpose. Jonah inhaled. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, he was talking to humans again. Name's Jonah Carter, he said, voice steady. A pause. Then the voice returned, suddenly tense. Repeat that. Did you say, Jonah Carter? Jonah frowned. Yeah. And who am I talking to? Another pause. This time, a second voice, softer, but more urgent. Jonah Carter, you were declared missing 10 years ago. Jonah's heart stopped. His fingers curled into fists. That's impossible. It's only been. Had it been weeks? Months? Panic tightened his throat. The voice continued. You're coming in under an unknown vessel. We need you to power down your ship immediately. Stay where you are. Jonah's pulse pounded. 10 years. The T'Kari had taken more than just his body. He wasn't going back to the life he had left behind. He didn't have one anymore. Final choice. Jonah looked at the colony below. This was what he wanted, right? A place to belong? But if he went down there, he wouldn't be Jonah Carter, missing child. He would be something else. Humanity didn't know what he had become. Neither did he. His hands hovered over the controls. Stay, and try to be human again. Or leave, and accept that he never truly could. The colony loomed ahead, waiting. Jonah exhaled. It was time to decide.